You mentioned Cornell. Now, Cornell is an Ivy League school that made a run a few years back to the Sweet 16, and they have now been matched. So you talked about the first weekend of the tournament. At the top of the show, I asked a fundamental question: if upsets were nearly as sexy as they used to be. The reason I asked that is it seems to me that the chasm between those double-digit seeds and the top tier is closing, because this past weekend we saw a 16 seed win, we saw a 15 seed win, a 13 seed win. We may have even seen a 14. I can't even remember. But my point is, every single year, it seems like these are becoming more and more commonplace. To that point, UMBC was the only 16 seed to beat a number one seed when it happened in 2018. And 5 years later, Fairleigh Dickinson, FDU, does it again. 5 years is a very, very short amount of time. Do you think that chasm is becoming smaller, and the talent pool just as a overall product is getting better and better, and there's kids that are getting opportunities to go multiple places so that an FDU can have a moment like this?
Yes, first of all, the upsets are wonderful. I don't think that the excitement of them is diminishing at all. If anything, it's more exciting because it used to be those 116 matchups. It was a foregone conclusion, and now it's a game you want to watch. Because we've seen it. I mean, and there were even a couple others that were somewhat close.
Because you never know,
year.
like that feeling of, well, we've seen it now, so like it could happen again.
Yep.
You're right, man. Like I was tuned into it, and as soon as I saw the score, like 3/4 of the way in, I immediately switched to it, and I'm like, I can't believe that a 16 versus 1 has now become appointment television.
Sure. And the most shocking part about it, when I watched the FDU Purdue game, they looked like the better team on the floor. For at least the amount of time I was watching the game. I mean, they were explosive, athletic, attacking the basket, playing tenacious defense, which is what you have to do if you're an undermanned team, undersized even in their case. But oh my God, man, like just the athleticism they had and just the speed at which they played with was impressive. And it was a problem for Purdue.
Big problem.
And yeah, and I mean, it was fun to watch though. That's for sure. And I tell you what, they say it all the time. You mentioned it last week, especially these mid-majors. If you have great guard play, man, great guard play,
Up and coming
like
head
the
coach.
secret ingredient to success. But my fear coming out of these types of situations, and this kind of ties back into what we talked about with NCAA realignment. Part of me wonders if the blue bloods of the world, these Power Five, we'll call it Power Six in basketball because we got the Big East. If this kind of stuff happening regularly is going to maybe speed up their want to isolate themselves from everyone else, because they feel like you're having these mid majors come in and take what's theirs, take money out of the pot, keep them from winning national championships or competing for national championships. I mean, I'm trying to think how to word it more eloquently, but I could see them essentially taking their ball and going home per se, because they're tired of the little guy on the block coming up and beating them every day. And so they're like, well, enough of this, peasants. You go back to wherever. We're going to go do our own thing.
I don't think that it is that crazy, because what we're seeing now more often in the tournament is they're not just winning one game, they're winning 2 games or sometimes even more. And last year, St. Peter's was an aberration, getting to the Elite Eight. And Princeton now is in the Sweet 16 as a 15 seed. And it's not that the committee is misranking these teams or poorly ranking these teams. I just feel as if they believe a lot more now. And Arizona comes in. It's really funny because I said, Arizona's a really good team. We make fun of the Pac-12. Boom, out. And it's like, remember, we had an episode once that we said, like, dreams come here to die. So if we ever talk
That's
about
true.
you are fucked, my man. But FDU, you're right. They played with a tenacity. Now, I think the best part about their story is they weren't even really supposed to be there because they lost their conference title game to Merrimack, who I believe was making the transition to Division I, or there was something that happened with their story, but they were able to go on a technicality. Everybody made fun of them. So what did they do? They blew out the team in their playing game, and they beat the number 1 seed Purdue, who is now, in my mind, a school that I will never trust again in my bracket.
Frauds.
Absolutely. I didn't have them going that far, but it is kind of one of those things. But Princeton, I want to give you a little nugget. I know we do a stat of the week, but there are so many nuggets little to give out here. The Princeton men and women both won NCAA tournament games for the first time ever in the same tournament. I thought that was actually really,
Wow.
really neat. I always love it. I don't know how you feel about that. I always love it when the men's and women's programs get to celebrate something simultaneously. I think one year the UConn women and the UConn men won a national championship. I like that because it feels like they can celebrate together. It's like the one time where it feels like they're kind of on the same team. So there's a lot of solidarity there. But Princeton, it was great. I don't know if you remember the Princeton teams from the 90s, but that backdoor cut offense, which is from like 1930s. And my wife was asking me why Princeton was able to beat them. And I said, well, Princeton's game is to slow the game down to an excruciating crawl so that you get less possessions. Good guard play helps that, by the way, because you want to keep the ball. You don't want to turn it over. And they want to get good high percentage shots at the end of the shot clock. It's how they have always done their offense. She said something. Is it like the triple option? And I'm like,
Yep.
it kind of is because nobody else plays that way. And Princeton has never really been able to break through in the tournament. I loved this story.
Yeah, I get it. When I was an offensive coordinator the last couple of years, we ran the wing T offense, which is from the freaking Stone Age, and we ran it for the same reason because a lot of times we were undersized and undermanned, and it was a way to control the ball, slow the game down, and basically 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and just hope you kept it close enough to have a shot at the end. But and then that's what they're doing. It was fun to see, and I think with the men and women both winning, as wrong as it may be to say, I think them winning simultaneously does elevate the spotlight on the women a little bit. Just because it's an added storyline that's going to get thrown in there when they're talking about the men, and it's going to bring the women along, which is people say, well, they should stay on their own, and they should, but you can't sit there and say that it's not going to raise the profile of it a little bit because it absolutely will, which I think is awesome. And I tell you what, they're going to have a shot. They're playing Creighton. Creighton's a good team. They're not, they're like a 6 seed, I think. One thing fascinating about Creighton is, on TikTok, I saw a bunch of those people putting like those weird matrices together, like the teams that are in the top this in offense, top this in defense, top whatever. It's like there's only 6 teams that fit that category, and Creighton was one of them. And it's like the teams that always win the national championship are in those categories. So who knows? Maybe Creighton's onto something here. But but at this point, you throw the seeds out. You're in the Sweet 16. You belong there.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, talent got you there, and let's see what happens.
But what it told me over the weekend was that this is probably one of the most wide open fields that I've seen in quite a while. And I think with the departure of 2 number 1 seeds now, one of them being Kansas, who, by the way, for those of you paying attention on social media, both Coach and I picked them to win. So
yeah, my bracket's screwed.
So we are terrible at this. Never listen to our advice, except for the pick of the week, but never listen to our advice on any of this. But I think it just proves that nobody really knows anything. But Alabama surely looks good now. And they seem to have what could be a very good path heading towards. And they're definitely the most talented team probably that's left. But all these scrappy teams are in there. You got Miami, you've got Gonzaga, you've got San Diego State. So many of these teams are left. And for the first time in a while, I think I'm excited for the next round to see who gets to the Final Four because it genuinely feels like it could be anybody.
No, and I love that stuff. I've told you before, I root for chaos, and I hope it happens. And I feel like last year at this point, the tournament was in a similar position. Like we had lost a couple of the higher seeds. You had the St. Peter's. I think there might have been a couple others. And I remember having that feeling like, shoot, man, it's free for all. Anybody's game. And then the Final Four panned out to be like 4 of the top teams, whatever.
Remaining,
and I was like, it's kind of disappointed a little bit. But no, I hope it happens. I think it's good for the casual fan for sure. I know that the Kansas and Duke fans of the world don't like it, but I think it's great. And it'll be interesting to see, man, because there's some really good matchups, some really intriguing matchups. I wouldn't want to play Miami right now. I
No.
think they're going to be a problem for Houston. The Michigan State and Kansas State matchup's going to be interesting too.
Yeah, there's a lot of schools like that. We're going to get into that in a second, but I just want to give a shout out to the state of New Jersey because now 2 straight NCAA tournaments. They have had St. Peter's, they had Princeton, and then they had FDU, which, by the way, is our boy Cleve's alma mater. So congrats to Cleve. He got to celebrate something. I'm not sure he's ever been able to celebrate anything in college basketball quite like that. And I had to tell him that they were winning.
He wasn't even watching, huh?
No. And I
Man.
said, FDU hanging tough. And he's like, yeah. He's like, oh, really? And then I'm like, they did it. And he's like, did what? And I'm like, number 16 seeds are now 2-150 all time against number 1 seeds. He did not know that. He's not a big college sports guy, in case you weren't paying attention. But you talked about Michigan State. And as I'm watching this game, now our boy Shaka Smart, another team that we said was going to go far, they're gone. Known commodities in the NCAA tournament. We always make a big deal about teams like that. Michigan State, Tom Izzo, you never count them out because of the tournament, but there's success, but there's always so much turnover. But I do think that programs like that who have had coaches that have seen it all are more dangerous when you get to these games where they are the underdog, because Tom Izzo has been in this situation before. Another fun nugget, he's now the winningest coach in NCAA tournament history when his team is the underdog, like the worst seed in that matchup. And Shaka Smart, poor guy, is like 1-8 in his last 9 NCAA tournament games. The guy can't catch a break. And do you think that that matters? That when a team like Marquette, who is not traditionally known as a tournament mainstay, and then you got Tom Izzo, who's been there for 30 years, won national championships, and made Final Four runs with teams that had no business being there. Do you think that that stuff actually matters when it comes down to the play on the court?
I don't know, man. It's tough because I feel like experience matters. I feel like experience matters a lot, but the coach isn't able to go out there and physically play the game. Now, maybe as a player, if you're playing for Tom Izzo, you just have blind faith and he has your full trust, and you go out there and play hard because you feel like he's put you in the best position to win. But I can't say that Shaka Smart's guys don't feel the same way. I mean, she's coached in a lot of NCAA tournament games too. I know it may not seem like it because he seems like still a fairly young guy, but the guy's coached a lot of basketball and a lot of important basketball. So I think it's relevant, and I think that, but it might be overstated a little bit.
Am I just like going with my heart here? Like when I see the Spartans on the sheet, I'm like, oh, I'm going with the Spartans because I know what they are. Like it's just sort of like a gut feeling. And sports a lot of times is about that. I know that they've introduced analytics and numbers to so many sports, and they definitely have changed how the games have been managed or coached. But from a fan perspective, sometimes you just get that eye test, the smell test, the gut, whatever you want to call it, whatever cliche you want to use for it. That's just how I felt. As I'm watching this game, I'm thinking Michigan State is going to hold on to this because they're the more seasoned team, despite the fact that they might have all freshmen.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another thing that comes with experience is you've been in almost every possible situation at that point in time, and you know how to win, and you know how to will your team to win in those tough moments, and that only comes with experience. And like you're right though, there's just something about Sparty, man, when it comes March, especially as an underdog, as we just found out with your stat. But no, I wouldn't want to be Kansas State, and I wouldn't want to be Houston this weekend. I can tell you that much.
You know what I love about Michigan State is the fact that they're not like, I don't see them as a blue blood, but they're that gritty team that's always there. Like you never want to see them on your path to the Final Four because, again, Tom Izzo, there's some grit about that program. And there are some programs that just sort of have that feel to them that you're like, they're going to be tough out. It's like a pesky out. Remember David Eckstein, the former Cardinal? Guy would foul off like 17 pitches in a row. And you're like, God, I just can't get this guy out. That's kind of what Michigan State feels like in the tournament.
Sure. And speaking of that grit, I remember like a story they did, and this might have been like 10 years ago, at a practice where Izzo went and got some shoulder pads and helmets from the football program, and they were literally working on rebounding, wearing shoulder pads and helmets. I mean, he was just trying to preach and teach that the level of physicality that it takes to do that at a high level, in the Big Ten especially, and then on a national level even.
One of the things that also struck me this weekend was when they talk about the players. And I have to say that CBS does a really great job with the broadcast in general. I know that they had some missteps with the studio, but I'm talking about they have all these teams of announcers, and almost all of them are actually pretty good. Like I didn't feel like they were lacking in that department. And with so many needs and games out there, I thought it was interesting, but it seemed like every time they would highlight a player, they'd be like, oh, he transferred from here. Oh, this guy transferred from here. And there's all these transfer stories. And coaches like Tom Izzo are not a dime a dozen anymore because I think that the new rules, or what they would consider a lack of rules, have made it so that kids can pretty much leave anytime they want. And it's really difficult to get consistency within your program because of it. And that's kind of a deeper dive episode that we could do on it maybe next year. But I think that it has changed in a lot of ways because there really is there's no sense of loyalty, because if you're not playing in your first year, well, I'm just out. And I'm not sure how I feel about that just yet. I like that the players are getting compensated, but I think there's a lot of unintended consequences to the way that it's sort of the Wild West right now.
No, I think you're right. The portal is definitely changing the game, especially for mid-major programs, because you're basically rebuilding your roster every year because your best players are most likely getting offered by higher level programs. It actually happened to Bradley's best player today. Everybody thought he was going to leave to go pro in Europe. If he did leave, he would leave to go pro in Europe. No, he entered a transfer portal, which was shocking, honestly. But you can't blame the guy. I'm sure there's a big bag of cash sitting somewhere at one of these Power 5 schools that he's going to go take. And I don't fault people for that. A lot of people, especially old school people, don't like that. But I'm not going to going to throw shade at a guy that's going to do that. If I was 19, 20 years old and you told me you're going to give me 50, 75, 100 grand to go play basketball for you, like, peace out. I'm there, man, like, in a heartbeat. And that's what's I think that's also helped a lot of mid-major programs too, though, because there are a lot of players that maybe fall down from power fives that just didn't get a chance in year one or whatever, that land at a lower level, that maybe help prop up a mid-major for a year or so, and then eventually they'll leave again and go elsewhere. But no, you're right. I think it's changing the game and makes things really interesting. And like you said, the tournament, there were probably more former players from the Missouri Valley Conference playing in the NCAA tournament this weekend than our current players in the Missouri Valley Conference.
I'm not saying that I noticed that, but I definitely noticed that every time they'd mention a school, I'm like, hey, I know that school. So one last thing on college basketball that I want to bring up is you talked about old, and we talked about the Big East last week, and the Big East has had 2 coaching changes at St. John's, and Rick Pitino is now going to be the head coach there. I'm pretty sure that he's a vampire. He's going to live forever and everything. But talk about a guy who can do basically everything wrong with a program and still continue to ascend the coaching ranks at his age. And we just heard today that Ed Cooley, who is now the former coach of the Providence Friars, who was my hometown team, I went to high school 5 minutes from there, like a 5-minute walk. My high school was within shouting distance of PC, is now going to be the head coach at Georgetown after famed alum Patrick Ewing got fired after what is just an abysmal stint there. St. John's and Georgetown are really relics of the past, but I want to focus more on Georgetown because I think we could make fun of Rick Pitino all day. But is Georgetown even a job that is prestigious anymore? It doesn't even feel like a job that's relevant. Georgetown's relevancy is, gosh, at least 10 years ago now.
Yeah, sadly, I think you might be right. And the fact that they didn't just have a bad year, but they got the piss beat out of them a lot. I mean, they did not play very many close games. And it's one thing if you're at least competing and just not winning games in a tough league, but that is not what happened there. It's sad that one of their prodigal sons, Patrick Ewing, came back to basically put the nail in the coffin of what was once a proud program. I don't know if there is any resurrecting Georgetown. Maybe the fact that they are in the Big East and that they do have their history to sort of, I guess, call back to, but they definitely have some work to do there. It's going to be an uphill climb.
Yeah, and a school like Georgetown gets sort of left in the cold with all this realignment because they don't have a football program to lean on. Their basketball team has been crappy for the last 10 years. And it's sad because Georgetown used to be a mainstay in the tournament. But I will say this, though. I think that Purdue might very, very, very rapidly becoming the new Georgetown. Because remember, Georgetown used to lose to 13s and 14s all the time in the tournament. You could never trust them except that one time that they went to the Final Four. Okay,